welcome everyone to another episode of Little Talks with PopCultX. Today we have a very special guest, Terry Blas. And for those of you that are not familiar, he is an illustrator and writer behind the viral webcomics You Say Latino and You Say Latinx, which is available on Box.com. He has written comics for Ariana Grande in the series Steven Universe and Rick and Morty. His original graphic novels are Dead Weight, Murder at Camp Bloom, Hotel Dare, and Lifetime Passes. He is also currently the writer for the Mexican Marvel Comics superhero series Reptile. So thank you very much for joining us. Welcome, Terry.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I felt a little...
It's a weird bio. I'm not trying to not get
I felt a little like Vanna White because I actually have a couple copies of your book. So we have Dead Weight and Hotel Dare. I'll see, look, I'm doing it for you.
Listen, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready.
I'm like, I have Reptile somewhere.
You're like, I've got it up here in my head.
Exactly.
It's all good.
It's because you're straight, Danny. Sorry.
That's why.
It's okay. We're straight friendly. We're allies.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you so much. I'm really excited. I'm a big comic book nerd. Danny is as well as I've sort of like brought him to the nerd universe with MCU and getting him into comics. He finally has like subscriptions to, services where he can read and download comics. So he is getting his nerd points as we speak. And so
nice.
I actually just finished Hotel Dare, and it's such a good book. So congratulations on such a good piece of work. I kind of want to start from the beginning, if you will. So this is this was your second novel?
That's my second graphic novel, right? Yeah. My first one is Dead Weight.
Yeah.
Murder at Camp Bloom.
Yeah, which I'm so glad that Arizona didn't have fat camps because I would be one of those characters. My dad would have had me in there so quickly. And it would not have been good. It would have been a waste of money. But
what a great setting for a story, I thought, at least, because there's kids there who like definitely want to be there, definitely want to lose weight. And then there's other kids who are like, I feel like I'm in prison for the summer. Like, I don't want to be here. So, and then you just throw in a murder.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, traditionally, like camps are always been like a great place for, post or pre-adolescent people getting murdered, Friday the 13th, Sleepaway Camp, which is like one of the greatest horror movies ever made, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So anyway, so getting back to your work, well, let's go ahead and start with your first novel then, Dead Weight. What about a fat camp and murder, like sort of, how did that come to your mind? Like it's such an original idea. What brought that?
Well, it's funny how comics work. I had another idea in my head for a long time, which is actually my book Lifetime Passes that will be out in November. And I had pitched it to Oni Press, which is a local company here to Portland, Oregon. And they were going to be discussing it and whether or not they would pick it up. And I told the editor that I was speaking with, I was like, I have another idea. It's not really developed or anything. And she was like, well, what is it? And I was like, it's a murder mystery at fat camp. She was like, that sounds great. Write up a thing for it and we'll discuss it at the next table read. And I was like, that's in 2 days. She's like, yeah. So I went home and literally wrote as much as I could, developed as much as I could about this. But I did have this idea. I think that sometimes like writers, we get like little nuggets, I guess, for lack of a better way of saying it. And then eventually some of them start to come together. And as a kid, I loved the movie Heavyweights. It was like one of my favorite movies. And but my first my first thought was like, where are the girls? Where are the girls at this camp? Surely like young women deal with weight loss, deal with like their, image and body dysmorphia, or at least discuss it and have it be prevalent in the conversation more than I think some young men. And, and so I was like, this is ridiculous. Where are the girls? And then I saw a documentary like in the mid 2000s, I think. It's on YouTube, but it's an MTV documentary just called Fat Camp. And it's about this one summer at a fat camp or a weight loss camp. And it focuses on the counselors and the kids. And there was so much like drama and romance and backstabbing and like comedy. And I was like, this literally has everything. It has like everything in it. what doesn't it have? And I was like, oh, it doesn't have murder. So that's where that came from. And I also just wanted to do, like, you know, I love series and stories like Scooby-Doo and Clue. And so I wanted to do something like that for like a younger audience and portray a bunch of young kids who are fat so that we could then see what else is it about these kids that makes them like interesting or funny or useful or important. Because usually when you have a fat character in a story, it's like, oh, I'm the fat one and I'm funny. And, you know.
Yeah, that's true.
And so I wanted to kind of have some discussions about that, you know, and have this young team come together and solve a mystery and work together. So that's sort of where that came from. I created the characters. I had sorted out most of the story, but I kind of got stuck. And that's when I sought out my friend Molly Muldoon, because she had read more murder mysteries than anybody I know. And we had like an insane 4-hour session at like a Starbucks where she was like, nice. Cool, tell me who everybody is and tell me what everybody's motivations are, you know, and like we kind of hashed out what the end would be to this and then decided to write the book together.
That's cool.
I knew I had a friend from art school because I have a degree in illustration. And I was like, this guy's amazing. I will snatch him up before somebody else does. And so that's Matthew Seeley. We got him to draw the book. And that's what Deadweight became.
That's cool.
Yeah, moving on to your second book, Hotel Dare.
That's really cool.
What I like, and for our audience, if they haven't read it, like go read it. It's about, you know, specifically a Mexican family kind of investigating their roots in Mexico, going to visit their grandmother in this hotel that is full of mystery and really unravels to be sort of like a space fantasy magic novel. And yeah, like it has a lot, but what I love about it is that as a kid, like I'm Catholic, and so I read a lot of like C.S. Lewis, like Christian fiction, and but it's like these young English kids like going in through this like wardrobe, and I'm like, oh, that's how fun for them. Like that's never going to happen to me. But here, like we finally get to see like Mexican characters have this fantasy life and get to go explore and have this adventure. And I was like, oh, we can exist in the fantasy realm as well. And so like, thank you for that. Like, I'm going to give you a pause because like we don't really see a lot of Latinos in space or Latinos in fantasy.
Oh, according to Hollywood in the future, Salma Hayek said this in a great interview. She's like, according to Hollywood in the future, all the Mexicans are dead. Yeah. She's like, we're dead. Like, if man gets to space, we're nowhere. Like, there was that movie with Matthew McConaughey that was, and Anne Hathaway that was like, ooh, this is so like almost realistic. Like I was like, where are all the Mexicans? This is the future of America. There are like 50 million Latinos in the US or Latinx people. 30 plus million of those are Mexican. And so we're the largest ethnic minority group in the country with the least amount of representation across media. And I'm glad you got out of the book what you got out of it, because when I pitched the book, I said, look, I want to basically write Star Trek and Harry Potter, but for Mexicans or for the Latinx community. Nice. Because in all of our modern fantasy that we have, it's all very European in its visual language. So that's like Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Game of Thrones. And I was like, just by default, by having one that's based in a Mexican Aztec aesthetic, doesn't that make it different? Like the dragon is a feathered serpent and the castles can be pyramids. And, you know, like that to me made it interesting in that way. And so it got picked up. I thought this might be my only chance to do this like fantasy epic. So I'm going to throw everything I want into it, which meant that there were like the battle scene is like these glass monsters and a unicorn and aliens and wizards.
Well, now I got to read this.
but I felt like but I feel like hopefully it makes sense, because the premise is that these kids find that this gross hotel that their grandma owns, every room leads to a different magical world in the hotel. Cool. And so as the kids begin to each explore their own, like they don't go on an adventure together quite yet. They each go to a different room because their abuela is like, go clean. And so they're cleaning separate rooms. And the kids begin to explore and find out maybe Mama Lupe doesn't own this hotel by coincidence. Like, why does she have this hotel? The premise is, what if you found out your abuela was like Doctor Who, basically?
Yeah.
And what I like about it is that the book is this fantasy epic, but it's largely about how family are people who treat you like family. Because there's one kid in the book who's adopted, or the two of them are adopted. There's people that are blood related who are like, I don't know you. I didn't grow up with you. You're not my family. And so I really wanted to write something about family. And each world that the kids go to, they find another person or creature or something that is also like, I don't fit in here in this place. So it's about a group coming together and like becoming a family and sort of healing the wounds of like family history. And I just wanted to write like a tough, mean old grandma. Mexican grandmas are always like, oh, mi preciosito. And I was like, no, she's like tough. She's like got a laser gun and she looks like Frida Kahlo in space, kind of like, I don't know. So awesome. Yeah, I want to do another book that's kind of like her young adventures.
That would be awesome.
Worlds, but yeah. Anyway, that's really what I wanted to do because I felt like Latinos deserve to have fantasy stuff as well. And I think sometimes when we see something slightly fantasy that's Aztec or Mexican or Mayan, there's a criticism of like, oh, but is that accurate? And it's like, is Game of Thrones accurate to England? Like, no.
Yeah.
So, we get to play around in that kind of arena too and have fun with it. So I'm really proud of that book. Claudia Aguirre is the illustrator for that book. She lives in Monterey. She's Mexican, and she also is the artist for my book Lifetime Passes, the one I mentioned that comes out in November.
Nice. It's really beautiful artwork. The story is amazing. One of the characters I kind of felt seen in, like I feel like I very related to him, the character of Brad, because there was a time in my life when I couldn't grow a beard. Danny, the character, can't grow a beard.
Like, I know this is a podcast. This is like 3 months of trying. So Brad is a wizard who belongs to an order of wizards that have this religious lie that they believe that your magic is only as strong as the length of your beard, and he can't grow a beard, so he thinks he's bad at magic, which is the lie he believes.
Yeah. I felt very much like the young gay kid like in the bear scene that can't grow a beard and is not welcome because like you don't have a big, long, thick beard. And so I was like, oh, like that character like really speaks to me. Now I'm a lot older and I have a bit of facial hair, but it made me laugh when I saw that. I was like, oh, like, I wonder if Terry like felt that too when he was growing up. And
definitely. And that's why the Olive character, she hears him say that and she's kind of like, what?
Yeah. Growing up then, did you pull a lot of influence from your childhood and youth to write into these stories so that way you could give back to the next generation? Maybe you didn't have this type of book, as we've said, that way you could give back to the next generation for them to look and see into, hey, you do belong in your own space.
I think so, more than I think realize. I think that like with Reptile, the Marvel series I just wrote, when they asked me, maybe I'm jumping ahead, but when they asked me if I was interested and if I would pitch something, I was like, sure, he's going to have 2 cousins and one of them is a girl and she can do magic and one of them is a boy and he's super gay. And they were like, okay. But I was like, I just didn't want kids that felt like I did to have to search super hard to find themselves represented. And that's also what I did with Hotel Dare, because 2 of those kids in that family are queer, and that's Olive and Darwin. And I just felt like when queer adults were queer kids, and when they don't see themselves represented in media, the message that they are receiving is that they don't exist, that they aren't anywhere. And I think that's a really terrible message. And so I feel like that combined with this constant question of like, where are the Latinos? and all the things that I watched as a kid that I loved made me feel like, no, everything I write is going to have characters in it who are Latinx, and especially who are young women. The largest or the fastest growing demographic in the United States is the college educated Latina. And I was like, where is that on TV? Where is that in books, in movies? And so I grew up in a house with 3 Latinas. I want young Latinas to see that they can be brave or smart or interesting or cool. Or, I don't want them to think that their lot in life is to be like a maid or the girlfriend of a drug dealer. Like that's just, and there are some great women in television who are Latina who are like changing the game that way. Like Gloria Calderon-Kellett, who was the showrunner for One Day at a Time, Tanya Sriracha, who did the show Vita. Like, there's some great representation and like game-changing stuff in those shows. And so I'm grateful for that, because I think that the more we put work like that out there, the less difficult it will be for people to be able to see themselves represented in media. Like, there could be some kid out there who would be like the next amazing, great writer and put so much stuff into the world, but not if they don't see themselves reflected back and feel inspired to like put work out there. So
yeah, absolutely. And I'm so glad to hear that you recognized, you know, how hard it is to search for representation. I remember being little and reading comics, and any little hint of that character might be Latino, I exploded. I was like, oh my God, are they Mexican or are they Puerto Rican? Like, what are they? Do they speak Spanish? And what I like about your characters is that it's not subtle. And I think that could be a choice of, you know, someone like, oh, hi, I'm gay. Oh, hi, I'm Mexican. But I think that even though the younger generation sometimes doesn't really like labels, it is really important for it to be like clear cut. Like, this character is gay. This character is, you know, Mexican American or whatever, because it removes that vagueness, and it's like, no, this is a role model. This is what they are. There's no vagueness. It is who they are.
I think it was a lesson I learned while writing Reptile 2. And I think that, you know, sometimes in a character description, say that like a TV show is being created or something or written, and they say like, oh, this character is Asian. It's like, well, let's not be vague about this. Chinese isn't the same as Vietnamese. Isn't the same as Japanese. These are different cultures, you know? So if you say like, this character is Latinx, it's like, well, okay. I feel like a lot of people do that because they feel that they are being more inclusive. Like, and I also think that I love TV, in case you can't tell, but I think that also comes from like casting. You know, you legally can't say we're only seeing Mexicans for this role. You can't do that. So I think they're like, well, let's just say Latinx then. But you can say that a character is Mexican. You definitely can do that. And what I did with Hotel Dare was I really wanted it to be acknowledged that Olive is queer, but she's also like barely 15. And her story is about an adventure she goes on. It's not necessarily about like how she identifies that way. So her younger sister is like, well, that kid at school called you queer. And she's like, I am queer. And then that's it. And then you move on. So then kids, and I feel like, you know, maybe in that way, I thought maybe if there's like a young girl who's a lesbian and she sees it, she's like, cool, I can identify with that. Or maybe there's a young girl who's bi or whatever, and they feel seen. And so when I wrote Reptile and I had the character Julian, you know, he talks about coming out, and he talks of, you know, he's like very himself. And my editor asked, you know, do you want to amend some of this language and be explicit and say that he's gay? And I was like, well, I feel like it's kind of obvious. Like, I know a lot of kids don't want to label themselves. Do you think we should? And she had something so interesting to say to me that I didn't even consider. And she was like, well, when you write superhero comics or like when you create characters that could then be down the line written by someone else, if you're not explicit and say who that character is, then there's a chance that someone else down the line could be like, well, they didn't say. So, and I was like, oh no, Julian's gay. like, you know, I write all kinds of characters, but that's just how I saw this character. And I was like, oh no, so he's definitely got to say it then, so that I can be the one to establish that that's who he is, and we can move on. So
yeah, especially when fanboys and girls and people are so like particular about canon, and oh nope, issue 158 it says that they're you know they're straight and they like a girl, and then like, oh well, people can evolve, like, you know, I was straight at one point too, so like I don't, but I appreciate that it's like you're setting it in stone, and it's like, no, this is who that character is. So that's fantastic. We've obviously referenced Reptile now a couple times in your talking, so let's go ahead and talk about that. Like,
sure.
your big gig at Marvel, and it is a character that you know, you kind of took the mantle, or you know, you took it over. It was a character that was introduced in some previous comics, but I think you have sort of, you know, really created the character in a sense that, you know, brought him to the mass media, and now he's like an icon. How did that happen? How did you get that job writing this great comic?
I was actually researching another Mexican Marvel character that I had come across called Hummingbird. And she's this Mexican teen who was like trafficked into the United States. She was saved by some iteration of Spider-Man and doesn't remember who she is. And I was like, that's an amazing story. Like, why is there not a miniseries about her going back to Mexico, trying to discover who she is, her powers, where they came from, all that? That still hasn't happened. And as I was researching this in the hopes that like maybe someday when I'm 85, Marvel will ask me to write something. My agent sent me this email that was like, hey, check this out. And it was an editor at Marvel who asked if I would be interested in pitching a 4-issue series about this character. And I was like, yeah, Hummingbird who? Like, step aside for a second. She will always be there. She will stay there. But she had read Hotel Dare and thought, this is an epic action story that also has an emotional core to it. And that's what they wanted with Reptile. And they also wanted it to skew to a younger audience. One review was like, this seems like it's for like a young audience. I was like, it is. Like,
you're
as
right.
As if it's some sort of bad thing. Yeah. And it's also one of my strengths. So I thought about it, and my first thought was, yes, obviously I'll do this. And my second thought was, I've never heard of this character. And I was like, if this is a Mexican-American teenager who can turn into any dinosaur, one, how have I never heard of him? And two, he should be the most popular character for kids at Marvel. Yeah. Like, that's what every kid wants to do. Like, I had dinosaur toys as kids. I have dinosaur toys now. Like, and so felt like I was perfect for this. I thought, like, I'm Mexican American. Like, I can grasp sort of, I think, the voice of this character and make it interesting. But also I was one of those kids that was like, in fourth grade, like, Archaeopteryx was the first bird dinosaur found in a fossil line. So I was definitely a dinosaur nerd kid, and I was like, this is perfect for me. So I pitched pretty quickly. They made it clear, like, we're talking to some other people too. So, and I was like, okay. But when I did Steven Universe, I wrote a 4-issue series for Boom for Steven Universe. The same thing. They asked me to pitch something, and I thought, if I can write something that's good enough. Doesn't have to be perfect, but if it's good enough and I get it into them first, then they're going to go like, yeah, this works. And they're not going to look for someone else. So I took the same sort of task with Reptile. I read every single comic that he was in, wrote down some notes as I went through, and tried to go off of instinct as like, what is the story I would want to see? And what logically have they not done with him that needs to be done? His whole character is based off the premise that his parents were paleontologists. He found this like fossilized amulet crystal thing on a dig that he went on with his parents with. It gave him these powers. And on the next dig that his parents went on, they disappeared and they never came back. And I was like, and there have been many comics after this where like I would be like, where are my parents? And then that's also having this be a story about Mexicans. I was like, he has to talk to someone. So I'm giving him cousins. He has a grandpa. And so I was like, and his grandpa's old. So I was like, well, in my mind, his grandpa's getting older. I also asked Marvel, what is the context in which this story takes place in terms of the Marvel universe? And they told me that in the Champions title, which was my favorite title anyway, that there had been a new law instituted where teenage superheroes weren't allowed to use their superpowers without the permission of like a mentor, like specifically assigned to them. And it was called Kamala's Law after Miss Marvel because she had been hurt. And I was like, this is great then. To me, it says he's like, I am 16. I just want to be a kid. My grandpa's getting old. I'm going to help him move in with my aunt. And I'm going to like put superheroing aside and just focus on my family. And then of course, he gets into a fight with his grandpa about their parents, like, because there's framed photos of them that they're going to put up on their like they're like ofrenda for Dia de Muertos, right? And he's like, Mom and Dad aren't dead. They're we don't know what happened to them. And his grandpa's like, you need to move on. And he's like, no, I don't. And so of course the setup for this whole series is that a villain attacks him and says, I want your amulet. You're going to give it to me and you're going to do it willingly. And he's like, why would I do that? And he's like, because I know exactly where your parents are. And that to me is like exploiting his biggest weakness as the thing that he needs and wants. And then I set it up so that his cousins and him over this 4-issue arc go on this journey to like find out who this person is, why he knows where, you know, his parents are. And this villain, of course, has similar powers to him. But yeah, it's just a story I wanted to set up and have be very much about pride in your family and in your heritage. Mm-hmm. It is very Mexican. I know there's like a queer Mexican on YouTube who makes like reptile hate videos because he hates how queer and Mexican it is. And I'm like,
what? No.
Yeah. And I'm like, well, whatever. And I'm like, why do you hate how queer it is? You're literally quoting Drag Race and wearing eyeliner right now, girl. Like, but I understand why some people are like, you know, why does this Mexican hero have to talk about being Mexican, et cetera, et cetera? And Reptile himself has even said that before in previous comics. And I thought, you know, until we have a Mexican superhero in Marvel that we can point to as he's Mexican, he's proud of it, he talks about it, then we need that. And now that we have it, we can like, you know, his next adventure, I don't think he would talk about it so much, but his cousin who's gay confronts him saying like, you don't even want to use your powers. And he's like, I can't use my powers right now. And he's like, no, you won't use your powers. He's like, that's different. And he's like, but it's illegal. Like, I can't because of the law. And he's like, slavery used to be legal. It's still illegal to be gay in some places. And he's like, how are we supposed to believe in a better world for people like us if we don't see anyone out there representing us and inspiring us? And so to me, that person missed the point. So that's what I wanted to set up is, you know, I started researching Mexican Marvel heroes, and there are quite a few, but if we don't support the books and the stories that are written about them, then they fall into obscurity. Those characters don't get used again. And, you know, we then think that like we don't have any of them to point to, but we do. So that's sort of what Reptile is. And I hope I pulled it off, but we'll see.
Yeah, you absolutely did. And, you know, screw the hater. We'll focus on the positive because the reception, I think, has been so great for Reptile. There's so many people on social media that love this character, me being one of them. And I think that, yeah, two of us, we have your back. I know this series, you know, is a mini series. It just ended at the most recent issue. Do you have? I mean, I don't know if you can say, but is there anything in the works to continue this character? Are they kind of waiting to see how successful it was?
So I know he has been seen in an upcoming graphic novel that Miles Morales, Spider-Man, and Ms. Marvel are in, and Wolverine. Like they're in that book. I'm not sure what it's called, but it's a skews for younger readers. I think it's a graphic novel. And then in November, the next issue of Marvel Voices, which is called Marvel Voices Comunidades, comes out, and he has a story in that. And one of the variant covers is of his cousin, Eva, who I created. And I wrote an 11-page story about her, setting her up as a hero as well. And I know of one other thing that he will be in that I can't talk about. and so far, that's it.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I think if more people are vocal about it and write Marvel, maybe something would happen. But I know that the plan was to give him this 4 issues and then, you know, who knows? Maybe to put him in some other stuff. He's on the cover. He's on 2 of the covers for Comunidades. And I do think that they want him to be more of a visible teen hero. But I thought he would fit in pretty well with like a series like Champions or whatnot. He and Miles and Nova can just start talking Spanish, and Kamala can be like, "What's happening?" But that book was discontinued, so that book ended. So I don't know what's going to happen with him, but I hope more stuff does happen with him. But I do think that he and his cousins made sort of an impact, and that people do want to use those characters and include them in other things. So
absolutely. And I love the Ava character because I think it's such a natural fit to have a Mexican young woman be a magician, a bruja, whatever you want to label it. Because I mean, it's so part of our culture. I mean, I just imagine like so many girls in LA, like, oh, like that's me, like that they are a natural witch. And so I was like, why hasn't that been done before? Like you said, like there's so many things that like should be obvious, but now we have her introduced. So I'm really excited to see, you know, more adventures from her.
Yeah, I felt like, if I were a young woman living in this world and I had to deal with, being scared to walk home alone at night or speaking Spanish in public and someone might yell at me, I'd be like, I would be learning magic so I could be like, don't mess with me. You know what I mean? And that's sort of where her motivation comes from. But also she isn't a kid who, her mom's a doctor. They do all right in LA, but she's not like a super wealthy, white, privileged kid who was like being taught by the Scarlet Witch or like, it's been shown now in a preview. So I think I can talk about it a little bit, but the story that I've written for her is in Comunidades is that she is getting ready. She's on her way to Strange Academy. And in Reptile, she's like, I taught myself magic. I taught myself magic by reading books and watching YouTube videos. And so now she can go to this school, I think, because she's probably, shown, I don't know, like she did a pretty big spell in the final issue. And so I would think that like a magician like Doctor Strange or Scarlet Witch would be like, I sense some energy.
Yeah.
and we might need to teach this person how to contain and control. So yeah, that's sort of what I've set her up as. I love that character. I think she's really cool. I like that she's sort of self-taught DIY. And I think that a lot of young women can relate, especially a lot of young Latinas can relate to like feeling that I'm smart and I could be useful, but I'm not being given the chance.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So hopefully she's the new Supreme. That I'm putting that out in the universe.
I'm fine with that.
The other cousin is Julian, and the thing that I love about it is that he's sort of, on the spectrum, a little bit more flamboyant, a little bit more femme than some of the other gay characters that we see in the comic book world. And what I particularly like about that is that I think there's a sense for gay men that, you can come out, you can be openly gay, but there's always this like, oh, but I'm still a man. Like I'm still masculine. And it's like, it's such a stupid insecurity. And I get it.
And especially in Mexican culture, right? Like
exactly.
The idea of a machista, you must be this kind of man.
Yeah. I saw a video. I don't know if you've seen it, but I don't know the guy's name, but he's putting on makeup and his dad walks in and is like, Mijo, what are you doing? I literally almost started crying. I don't know if you've seen it, Daddy, but it's this YouTuber. He's putting on makeup. His dad doesn't know that he does makeup tutorials. And he like quickly turns off the light as his dad's walking into his bedroom. And he's like, Mijo, what are you doing? And he's like, oh, I'm just doing a YouTube. And he's like, no, like what? Let me see. What are you doing? He turns on the light and he's in like full beat makeup. And he's like, oh, Mijo, is that what you want to do? Like, I love you. I accept you no matter what. And it was such a sweet moment that is so important, I think, for not just Latino or Mexican people to see, but like the world. Because I think there's this misunderstanding and it is sort of, it's something that we have to deal with within our community, that there is a macho, it's a problem. But at the same time, like it just reminded me of my dad, like openly accepting me. And so when I hear people say, oh, like Mexican men are so macho, they're so misogynistic. And I'm like, yes, that's true. But like, let's also celebrate the Mexican men who are like such great hard workers and support their families and welcome their gay sons into their lives and celebrate them. And I'm totally getting off on a tangent now, but I just, to see a character like Julian, that's just like, there's no questioning, who he is, or, it alludes to the fact that there was a bit of a struggle for him, but like he is now as a young adult living his life openly, as fabulous as he wants to be. And his cousins are like, yeah, it's fine. Like, no big deal.
There's a few things that I wanted to put in there that I felt were important. One of them is that he has a huge poster of a male pop star on his wall. Mm-hmm. And I think because a lot of young gay boys, when they grow up, they can't put those things on their wall that, it's going to out them. It's going to expose a dark secret about them. And I think that's another reason why a lot of us gay men have our divas. And we're like, oh, I love Buffy. She's so hot. It's like, yeah, but I want to be her. So we just can't say that next sentence, Yeah. And so I think that it was important for me to show that because he does talk about like, he thinks he's going to die at one point and he's like, you can have all of my like Dazzler albums, but bury me with the Darla Deer and whatever,
Yeah.
And I also felt like him being best friends with his cousin, who is a straight boy who doesn't care that he's feminine, I think was cool, because then it can show that like that I don't feel like I see that often. A friendship represented in media where a straight boy and a gay boy are like best friends. It's not an issue. Like the straight boy's not like, okay, be a little less whatever right now, please. I didn't want to do that. And I felt like that could hopefully show young kids that they don't have anything to be afraid of. And I think there's a tiny bit of that machista like conversation in the 4th issue with Beto's grandpa too, because he explains like that he's sick, but the whole reason he didn't want to talk about it was because he felt like it made him look weak. And Beto was like, ugh, whatever, forget that machista garbage. He's like, isn't you telling me about this brave? Isn't that strong? He's like, so who cares?
Yeah.
So yeah, I felt like it was at least an important conversation that could be touched on a bit. So I'm glad that I was able to put that in there.
Yeah, me too.
Coming from the other viewpoint from my side, seeing the character of Julian, and for me, I've only read the first 2 issues. I have number 3 and 4 to go, but he seemed like he was the strongest of the characters because he was himself, and he didn't give a crap about what anyone else had to say about him. He knew who he was, and he wasn't afraid to put that energy out into the world. And to me, that showed that his strength right there, and that's what carried, I guess, them through and lifted him up. It really did. It really spoke to me in that way.
There's a moment later where Beto alludes to, he says that Julian and Ava are his heroes. And he's basically saying that Julian, by being himself and having that strength, like that's heroic. It inspires him to be able to do what he's going to do. So yeah, I'm glad that you like that you picked up on it.
Another thing that I picked up was the little Easter eggs towards like pop culture that you put in Reptile. And also knowing that you had your own, pop culture podcast show as well. So I know that you're a fan of pop culture. Obviously, Drag Race was something that you put into the comic with the little quote or the little nod to Untucked. So I'm assuming that you're a huge Drag Race fan.
Yes would be an understatement. I will say that I didn't want to just throw Drag Race in there. When I wrote that in there, I received an editorial note that was like, okay, what? And I was like, hey, in Generation X, Jubilee said that Drag Race is her guilty pleasure, and Iceman and Marauders said that he was a guest judge on Drag Race, so it exists in the Marvel universe. Nice. And they were like, okay. Drag Race has been huge for me. I've been watching ever since the first episode, and I've exhibited 4 times at RuPaul's Drag Con.
Oh, nice.
It's been a very interesting sort of progression for that show. It's become super huge. And of course, now it's a phenomenon with like shows all over the world. They've got like, Spain and Italy and Holland and Down Under and the UK, which is, I think, the best iteration of it. But yeah, for me, like drag queens in a way are like the superheroes of the queer community, because they have these like fabulous personas and costumes and not like a code name, I guess, or their drag name. Yeah. And they're fun to draw. So yeah, I love that show. And I feel like the history, we talked about this a little bit, but like the history of queer representation on television has been so abysmal that like when we have 5 channels, 6 channels dedicated to sports, like I don't think there's enough Drag Race. It's fine. Like, that's my gay sport. I feel like I finally know what a straight guy feels like who's obsessed with football, because I have RuPaul's Drag Race, because that's a thing now in my life.
The Super Bowl of drag. And
I don't believe in cheesy. Like, I don't care if something people think, oh, that's cheesy. To me, it's like, well, is it sincere? Is it genuine? And if it is, then who cares? But in a big way, it genuinely affected my life, because in the first season, RuPaul has this rant where she's like, what other people think of me is none of my business. Like, it has nothing to do with me. And I really had to think about that. It was what directly affected me to like come out to my parents, because I was like, well, I can't even care then like what they think about me. Obviously, they're my family. I want them to think I'm a good person. I want them to whatever, but I can't control someone. I don't have like X-Men powers, so I can't control someone. So I'm afraid of their reaction, but that is their business. And so it really affected me in a way where I started to, I think, live my life in a way where I wasn't going to be scared of that anymore. So yeah, just lots of things like that have been said on that show that I think are really strong and important and like heroic in a way. And I think a lot of people really respond to that show because it's not, like if you like Project Runway, that's amazing. If you like The Voice, awesome. But when you go on Drag Race, you have to know how to sew, dance, act, sing, sew, like everything. So you don't have to watch any of the other shows. You can just watch that one and do your own makeup and like, I think it's interesting when like maybe like a young starlet who's in a movie goes to like the Tonight Show and there's like 5 people doing her makeup and someone getting her water and the drag queen is doing it all by themselves. So yeah, anyway, I could go on about it forever. I don't think we need to. All I'll say is that like I met Valentina in person and I started crying.
Oh, wow.
I've done a lot of artwork for some of the queens for their merchandise and whatnot. But yeah, it's been interesting and really fun and I love that show.
Yeah, and tons of queens are actually huge comic book fans. They do cosplay. The first one that obviously pops into my mind is Dax ! Who's really famous. Has been on like comic book covers now in cosplay, which is really great. Why do you think that is? Like, I'm just curious. I think I have a reason for myself, but why do you think there's such a big overlap of like the gay community and comics, and why there's such a big following? For, especially like the X-Men, but there's so many gay comic book fans.
Most gay comic fans I know love X-Men. And I think that's largely because it's a story about something that happens to you around puberty that, you can't control, that other people shun you for, that some people hate you for. And that metaphor is really strong for a lot of people. And I think that a lot of queer people are, creative. We all want to kind of like, at least for me, I felt like growing up, reading X-Men led me to draw comics and start creating my own stories. And I felt like if I could become good at that, then as an adult, I could turn it into a job that hopefully I could support myself with, which meant independence from my religious upbringing. I wouldn't have to rely on those things. So I think that's part of the reason. I also just think like there's a power when that power is displayed in a superhero in like a proud, unashamed way. That's something I think that we look to like that we really want to be able to be as well. And I think that dressing up in cosplay or in drag makes a lot of queens respond, that it makes them feel powerful, makes them feel different. And I think that's mostly why, just because we want to be able to feel a way that we're told we're not supposed to feel.
Right.
I don't know. What do you think?
I think it's that too. Like, I mean, there was definitely a moment when I was young that I'm like, oh yeah, I'm like about to turn 13. I'm going to get my mutant powers. And then like, I used to pray like, okay, tomorrow's going to be the day I'm going to wake up and I'll be able to like walk through walls. And then sadly, like it kind of became like, oh no, like I have these feelings about guys. And then it was like, oh, don't make me gay. Like, let me wake up tomorrow and be straight. And so it definitely for me was that, like you said, that like accepting who you are, knowing that like society might think you're a mutant or, a homo or whatever label you want to put it as, like as the other, but that's going to be your strength. Like that is what's going to separate you from everyone else. And that's what is going to, you're going to embrace it. And like, now looking back, like now that's like, it's not all of who I am, but it definitely like me being able to embrace who I am has made me a stronger individual. So.
And I think that directly ties into what I tried to do with Reptile too, because Julian was telling Beto, like, maybe the reason you can't control your powers, because when you try to turn full dinosaur, you Hulk out. The animal brain takes over. He's like, you're not present. You're like thinking about what's going to happen. You're scared because you aren't trying to use your powers. So if you embrace who you are, if you like are fully present, you breathe in, you remind yourself that you're a being that's inside of your body. You aren't your body. Then maybe you can control it. And then when, if I'm not going to spoil anything for you, Danny, but like, all right, but, like, I think that also relates to that is like, when you embrace who you are, then, you can fully, I think, be what you're meant to be. So, yeah.
I with that, like, it also kind of touched my heart hearing, that talk going on, because I have anxiety and I've sort of dealt with that my whole life. Is mental health something that you've kind of researched to kind of have Julian talk in that way? And I mean, it's really insightful, and like, it definitely touched me as someone who's like been involved in like therapy and stuff like that. So I'm curious how that came about.
I see a therapist. I had a life coach for a while, and I definitely feel like it's important, and I benefit from having that and just having someone to speak to and bounce things off of in that way. I feel like, I don't know how to say this. Well, I was raised Mormon, and I was a Mormon missionary. And to this day, I still have dreams about being a Mormon missionary. And I wake up and in the dream, I'm like, I've already done this. I'm like, what is going on here? What's happening? And, speaking to my counselor was like, yeah, that's like a trauma response. And I was like, what? So to hear like you went through something that, was traumatic to you, and that's a common response to that, I thought was interesting because, to learn like about being in the present, to learn about breathing techniques, certain things that you can do that just, I think, help you feel more grounded and help you feel present. My life coach was like, why don't you go on a walk where you like a mindfulness walk? And I was like, what? And he's like, notice how it smells. Notice what you're seeing. And I was like, oh, I usually just like listen to music and look at my phone when I'm walking. He's like, yeah, and you're stressed out. So it was important for me. And I think that a lot of Latinos think that therapy is like para los locos. Like we don't do that.
Yeah.
And I also think that a lot of parents could benefit from talking to a counselor about their queer kids. So I think that that's something I wanted to put in there, and to have Julian be responsive to like, to talk about how those things helped him, and to then be able to tell his cousin and help him with those same things. I was like, this is great. He can pass it on and help him. I'm someone who struggles with anxiety and depression too. And I just wanted to be able to include that so that people feel like they have the tools, I think, or at least have the knowledge to know that I can find the tools to deal with these things.
Yeah. I'm really curious, Terry, to ask you or to, see if you could explain, have you taken a beat yet to really feel the weight of your accomplishments in having a Latino superhero, of having an out gay character in Marvel? And I don't know you obviously, but I am so proud of that accomplishment for you. Have you really been able to take a moment and just like fill your oats and be like, you know what? Yeah, I did that. Like, I have created this character that like generations from now, they will have.
I don't know. I don't know how to answer that. Okay, but I'll try. I'll say I'm proud of what I've accomplished and what I've written. I acknowledge that, I didn't create Reptil, but I feel like I helped sort of solidify a personality for him that is, a little bit more youthful, I guess.
Yeah.
I did create his cousins in this villain. And so I feel like I'm very proud of being able to create them. But I also did feel very supported by my editors in creating them. They were like, sure, great. That's amazing. Go for it. And so, like I said, I had been researching a lot of other Marvel characters, and there's there's Living Lightning. He's a queer Mexican character. There's lots of queer characters, but I guess I try not to think about the weight of all that, because then I feel like, or at least I tried not to think about it when I was writing it, because I felt like if I did that it would make me nervous, and that wouldn't service the story for the world, I guess. Right.
Yeah.
And so I just tried to write it from a confident, fun place. And, I don't think that I've sort of taken a lot of it in. I'm kind of a person that's like, and I don't think this is great, but I'm kind of a person that's like, cool, all right, now what's next? Yeah. But I feel like if I'm always thinking that, then I'm thinking about, like my career and not my work. And then I'm never really loving the work. And so I try to not think about those things when I'm working on the project, but maybe now I'll think about it and feel my oats a little bit.
Yeah, I think you should, because I mean it's so important, and like I said, us in the comic book nerd / Chicano Latino community like appreciate your work so much, because it's so few and far between the role models that we have in the industry, and we need heroes too, and it's such a great hero. I mean, Reptile, I mean, like you said, you didn't create, but under your skills, I mean, you developed the character further into something that's much more iconic.
Yeah, it's also why I wanted to give Ava and Julian like both heroic moments in the final issue as well.
Mm-hmm.
The book is Reptile. I can't like suddenly have it be like the Julian show, but I felt like I was able to set up a little bit of a thing so that you see that he's not just like an inspiring hero because he has nice words and makes costumes. He also gets to join in the battle and, with his weapon. And I wanted to set that up so that it didn't feel like it came out of nowhere. Because now I feel like there's like a young gay Mexican superhero that, I mean, I guess he is a superhero in some way, but that kids can look up to and find. I was like an adult before I felt like I saw a queer Mexican character that I could relate to. Like it was the gay kid on Ugly Betty. And I was like an adult, I never saw that as a kid. So I think we talked about it a little bit earlier. That's just what I wanted to do, is like help kids not have to struggle to find those heroes. Yeah.
I think someone that I kind of was drawn to was on My So-Called Life.
Ricky,
yeah. And the thing that, I'll be honest, was, at that time I was still sort of stuck in that like feminine dad, like, I'm not that type of gay. And then I think that a lot of gay men kind of go through that phase of like, as they're discovering themselves and like gaining confidence. But now looking back, like it was such a good role model. I mean, it was, short-lived, and but I think he was such an icon for queer Latino kids, and even as adults, like just being able to see that show and him, that character being developed.
And now he's the gay doctor on Star Trek Discovery.
Yeah, there are Latinos in space.
Right, finally.
I was getting worried there. I'm like, what year does that happen where we all disappear? Because I'm going to like go hide in the forest or something. I don't know.
I know, right?
Go hide in Puerto Vallarta.
Yeah.
So speaking of like moving on to your next gig, I actually just read some work that you did for DC. Are You Afraid of Darkseid? And you got the chance to work with or on a Wonder Woman story and a Vixen story. What was that like?
That was really interesting. That also came out of nowhere. I just got an email asking if I was interested in writing a Wonder Woman story and or a Wonder Woman and Vixen story. One of my favorite DC characters is Vixen. So I was like, absolutely. I mean, I would never turn down a Wonder Woman story, but the idea of like being able to write the both of them was fantastic, because I felt like we're living in an age where if I was offered a Vixen book, I would be like, maybe find like someone who can speak more genuinely to her character right now. I don't want to take that away from someone who could, but if it's like a team book or something, then maybe, I don't know. But the premise is that the Teen Titans are telling campfire scary stories, and I was tasked with like writing a story about some sort of like cryptid or like scary creature. And I have a friend, Michael, who I've done a podcast with. We did a 10 episodes or 11 episode series called Thank You, Britney, about Britney Spears. Because I knew absolutely nothing about her, and I was like never that much of a fan, and he was like obsessed. So the premise was that like I would ask him questions and he would tell me about her and whatever. But on our way, like on a trip together, he put on this podcast for me that was about like scary stories. And one of them was about the black-eyed children. And I was like, what is this? And it's these accounts of children knocking on your door that have like these dark black eyes that are like, let me in, like, let me into your house. And that you feel your energy being drained from you. And there's like multiple reports, whatever. I was fascinated by it. I don't necessarily believe in it, but yeah. But when the editor was writing me this email, they were like, maybe like a chupacabra or like a Bigfoot or the black-eyed kids. And I was like, I think it's called like the Bader Meinhof complex, where you like have never heard of something and then you hear it about it a lot, like after that. And I was like, yeah, black-eyed kids, please. And I think he was like, oh, all right. And so my idea was that like Vixen and Wonder Woman were in Vixen's village, her home village, and they're trying to figure out, like they've heard of reports about black-eyed children trying to get into the homes there. And it allowed me to write a story that I felt sort of dealt with, like it talked about like poaching and animals, and I love animals, and I wanted to like have Vixen sort of find out why these children have black eyes and were turning into these other things. So I don't want to ruin it for anybody who would read it, but I think hopefully it's a little, I don't know if it's scary, but I would say I have a really hard time trying to let go of like the comedy. So there are some comedic elements to it as well. Like, like Wonder Woman shows up and Vixen's like, where did you come from? And she's like, the jet. She's pointing behind her and it's like nothing there. Yeah. And she's like, I thought I'd like, help you out and give you a ride home. And Vixen's like, you do know that I can fly, right? I can like turn into like a bat or like a bird. And she's like, but the jet has music and snacks. And she's like, be quiet, I'm trying to figure this out. So yeah, and it's funny because the character that after the campfire story ends, the next page, one of the characters is like, I don't know if that story is really scary, but like they actually say that in the comic. But it was fun to do. It was really interesting. I felt like I got to research a little bit more about some of those characters and find out more about them, which is always great because you can add that to kind of your like Rolodex of stuff to pull out for later. But that was a fun experience. I would love to do more with DC. I hope that I get to, but I haven't booked anything else with them. So
if you could put that out into the universe and outside of, you mentioned that you love Vixen, what would be your like dream project for DC? What character really speaks to you?
Oh, that's really tough because I love a lot of DC characters, and I'm very partial to like Miss Martian, Martian Manhunter. I also love Blue Beetle. So those three, I think I would love to write anything for. I don't know. I think those are the ones. I actually would really love to write something Superman one day, and that's only because a lot of the stuff that has come out recently is about Jonathan Kent and him coming out, but I feel like someone who is the child of an immigrant who had to keep a secret their whole life might know a little bit about how to write that character. So I think that could be interesting. I wouldn't mind doing that one day, of course, but yeah, I think maybe Blue Beetle and Miss Martian are a little more realistic for me, but who knows?
One thing that kind of came to mind that I think that you would do really well with is, have you heard of the character Extraño? He was, I think, one of the like first gay characters in DC, and I think he's also HIV positive. So he's within the realm of like fantasy and magic. And so I think that kind of goes along with your talents.
I believe he had a story in the DC Pride anthology that came out this year. So yeah, that'd be cool. Like, I would write any character that they ask me to write. So I'd be like, sure, let me read a few comics and I'll get back to you with a pitch.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, outside of comic books and superhero world, have you ever considered writing any sort of like murder mystery novel or anything like that that's maybe away from your wheelhouse of comics?
Yes. Maybe not so much. Maybe not so much murder mystery, but
any genre. I just picked that one.
Yeah, I have several graphic novels that are not superhero-y or action-y at all. My next original graphic novel is Lifetime Passes, which is about theme parks. Okay, it's a long. Like, I have no elevator pitch for this. It's pretty bad. Basically, when I lived in Southern California, I lived right near Magic Mountain. I would go to Disneyland a lot, and I saw the culture around people who were obsessed with theme parks. And I had a friend who worked for a lot of theme parks who told me some very strange things about them. So I created this story about this group of teenagers who are obsessed with their local theme park called Kingdom Adventure. And Jackie is the main character. She's a young Mexican American girl who lives with her aunt because her parents have been deported. And her aunt is the head nurse at an elder care facility. And on a trip to the park, these kids find out that if a member of your party dies while at the park, that to avoid a lot of legal trouble, they will give your whole party lifetime passes to the theme park. Okay. And so the kids decide to form a fake senior citizen outreach program to take the elderly to the park every week in hopes that one of them might die so they can get lifetime passes. And one of the elderly ladies knows exactly what they're doing, but offers to go with them anyway. And she and Jackie begin to form a friendship that alters sort of what Jackie's thoughts are about the world and why she spends time with these horrible teenagers. And so I feel like I sometimes create a story that like seems to be like either really sweet and then have something messed up about it, or is really messed up, but then tricks you with like an emotional. And so I've definitely, like, that book is done. Claudia Aguirre did the artwork for it. You can Google it and see some like the cover and some preview images right now. I believe it'll be out on the 23rd or the 26th of November. I guess maybe the 23rd. The 26th might be Thanksgiving. Anyway, but I'm excited about that because it does talk about, sort of the current state of like ICE and DACA in the United States. It talks about, I set it in a town I used to live in California, which has been very manufactured to look very similar to, it's hard to describe, but like they filmed an episode of the X-Files there where that like a cult lived in this neighborhood because all the houses look the same and everybody dressed the same. And I was just so fascinated by the idea that this actual town that these kids live in is very fake, but that the theme park is very real to them. And so this like kind of juxtaposition of those two things. And yeah, I was just like, I think, I don't know why, but a lot of my books tend to have like relationships between young people and old people, and talk about what they have in common and what they don't. So yeah, that's my next book. I'm also developing like a horror comedy, a series right now. It's very early. I can't really talk about that yet. I did also write a biography graphic novel of Cesar Chavez, which comes out in November as well.
Oh, wow. Oh, nice.
And there's a series of books called like Who Is or Who Was. So like who was Joan of Arc or who was, whatever. And now they're doing a line of those, but graphic novels. And one of their first ones is Cesar Chavez. So that comes out November 2. That took a lot of research, but is great because I enjoy doing that. I want to write lots of different things, and I'm expanding out to hopefully not have all my stuff be about young kids, because I want to show that I have range. But yeah, I feel like I've got a decent amount of work that's different. But I don't know what else is down the line. Right now, I'm really focused on the horror comedy thing that I'm writing. And I'm really excited for lifetime passes. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
Nice.
I did also write it's been announced, but my friend Maddie Newton and I wrote a graphic novel called Eat Your Heart Out, which is about a young Mexican-American girl named Blanca who graduates high school in Idaho, and she wants to work in fashion. Her mom, Reina, wants her to go into real estate like her. So she runs away to New York City, to the Big Apple, where she moves in with 7 queer guys, and her mom sends a private investigator after her. So it's queer Mexican modern day retelling of Snow White.
That's what it sounded like. Yeah,
because Blanca means white, Reina means queen. The Big Apples, the 7 guys. The huntsman is basically the private investigator. And as we wrote it, incorporated a lot more fairy tale elements than we thought it did. And so, like, there's a drag queen who gets a dress messed up by like 2 other queens, and then Blanca has to fix it. And I was like, this is very Cinderella, very godmother. So lots of little things like that. So I feel like we had the opportunity to write sort of like a fun ensemble, almost rom-com, but not quite, like story. And that one's different than everything I've written as well. So
that's cool.
Yeah, that should be out in, I think, maybe a year or 2, but hopefully the cover will be released, I think, sometime early next year. So
nice.
That's really cool.
Yeah, you've also released a lot of cool like Mexican versions of mainstream superheroes like Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman. I'm a really big fan of that. I think it's like a really cool idea to like envision us as the superheroes. Is there anyone else that you have kind of in the works that you might release the images soon, or someone you'd like to do? That's sort of like the trinity of like superheroes.
Yeah,
But
I definitely wanted to do that Batman and finish out the trinity of heroes. I honestly don't know, because I feel like if I did do another one, it would definitely have to be someone that's in like the Justice League. And that's sort of tough to like, because I don't know what I would do for like an Aztec version of the Flash, or I don't know. So maybe like Green Lantern or Martian Manhunter. Like, I don't know. So I guess the answer is not really. The story about how this came about is that I had a black T-shirt with the eagle from the Mexican flag on it, but it was all in gold instead of like the actual colors. And this was around the time the Wonder Woman movie came out. And I was walking down the street and someone was like, "I love your Wonder Woman shirt." And I was like, what? and I realized, I was like, they think that my shirt is Wonder Woman's like chest armor. And I was like, this is the Mexican flag. And so I thought about it, and I grew up in a house with a lot of like Aztec warrior imagery. And I was like, well, why couldn't that be like an eagle, like an Aztec eagle? And then I was like, well, then that means that there's an Aztec Wonder Woman. And then, oh, well, okay, what does she look like? And so then I just started designing that. And
that's cool.
One thing led to another. And I drew a Superman. And yeah, those have been really fun to do. I like those a lot.
Nice.
That's really cool. I'll have to check those out. Yeah, I feel like I'm swimming upstream here to get caught up with all of your work. So I have a lot of homework to do.
I feel like I've dealt with the pandemic by doing nothing but work.
That's good though, right? I mean, there's a lot of people that, I mean, it's better than like eating the whole pandemic.
Oh, I did that too. I did that too. I'm trying to shed some of that weight right now. It's not happening very easy, but yeah.
Yeah. I think it's like goes hand in hand with like the struggle of being a gay man, of like weight, the body image thing. It's a struggle.
It's one reason why I moved away from Los Angeles, because I was living there in my early 20s. And that's when I think you're seeking validation from a lot of outside places, right? And I didn't think it was a very healthy place for a young gay person who wasn't like 6'1", 160 abs, Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm kind of curious about the young adult aspect of your work. I know you said you wanted to branch out, but was that a choice, being your religious background, maybe like thinking about representation, to be like in that wholesome lane versus, I know there are some other gay artists that sort of are a little bit more on the adult side of the superhero spectrum. And whereas like I mean, all of your work is stuff that I would feel comfortable like giving to my nephews and my nieces to read. And I wouldn't, nothing to be embarrassed or ashamed about. Is that something that like you consciously made an effort to do that?
I don't think I consciously did, but I think because so much of my youth was like watch Disney stuff that's appropriate, or, like what I was allowed to be exposed to was what I soaked up, I think formed a lot of my personal taste. And when I mentioned it before, but when I was like 16, Buffy premiered, and it imprinted on me in such a way that like is really gross and like whatever. But that was like a teen show that dealt with like supernatural stuff, but also like emotional problems. And so I think that is sort of that combined with like a lot of cartoons. I've always loved animation and comics. I think that like those kinds of things just really affected the type of stuff that I like. And also, for lack of a better way of saying it, I guess studied. I would rewatch movies over and over again. I've seen every episode of some of my favorite TV shows like a million times, that I can recite them and whatnot. But I didn't realize as a kid that what I was doing was really sort of studying a lot of things about them. I feel like I learned how to write a lot by watching a lot of television, because then I would notice patterns, and I would notice like, oh, this segment is this long, and then they go to commercial, and this joke, was set up this way, and there's an A plot and a B plot usually in an episode. And so I feel like that's sort of that it wasn't really conscious, but that it just sort of like made its way into me.
Yeah. It's cool because I like being able to have stuff, that I can show my nieces and nephews, as opposed to like my Tom of Finland book or something.
Yeah. Like maybe not that one.
Yeah. The one last thing, Terry, before you go, and thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, of course.
As you can see, I collect like comic book, stuff, toys, Marvel Legends. I specifically like people of color, and because it just means so much to me to have heroes that are, not just white men and women. So is there any way that you can somehow pull strings or get the Reptile Marvel Legend action figure created? Because I want to buy one. I need it.
I feel like to answer your previous question about like, have you taken it in? Have you felt your oats about this? I won't feel like I've made it until I have an actual official Reptile action figure. Right. And I feel like it's such an easy sell for a toy for kids, because you can have a figure with removable arms and legs that you then attach dinosaur parts to. Mm-hmm. I want it so bad that I found someone on Instagram who makes custom toys.
Oh,
and
wow.
I had him make this for me. And it's like a Shang-Chi and Jurassic Park, like,
oh, that's awesome.
Like figure that he customized. And I was like, I really need this. And I had him make it for me.
That's awesome.
His name's Zach Toys on Instagram, I think, like ZACC. But yeah, I'm right there with you. I want it. I need Reptile action figures. So much so that I even bought like the little Hero Clicks one I found online.
Oh, nice.
So, yeah. But yeah, let's start a petition or something. I don't know.
I was going to say, am I going to have to start? I'm sure I could easily get those signatures like yesterday. But I need it so bad. Like there's so few, and it would sell so much. I mean, I know businesses are all about money. Like you make it, Latinos will show up and we will buy it.
You just market it as a dinosaur toy that you can collect other parts to, right?
Yeah. Like you could have like the Build-A-Fig and it'd be like the big, Tyrannosaurus Rex reptile version, the actual character. I mean, yeah. So I need it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. From your lips to God's ears. Hopefully it'll happen.
I'll let you know if I hear anything.
Yeah. Awesome. Any other questions, Danny?
Well, I just wanted, so if our viewers wanted to learn more about you, do you have, I know where to find you on Twitter, but can you let our listeners know where they can find you on Twitter, Instagram, website? Go ahead and drop all your details.
The one thing that I really took away from art school was that my professor said, be easy to find. So on Instagram and Twitter, I'm just Terry Blas. And my website is terryblas.com.
There you go.
That's easy enough. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Terry, for spending
thank you.
Some time with us. We really appreciate that. We really appreciate you just getting, just telling your story and letting us know who you are and what makes you tick. So that's really cool. So
thank you very much. My pleasure.